In this video, we're going to create our first Rails project, and we're going to use the scaffolding to create our first model or resource. So we should have the Rails installed already, and we're going to create our first project. We're going to do Rails new to-do. And I'm going to create a to-do list that's going to keep track of tasks that I need to do with due dates and a priority. And right now we have to talk about our database. What database are we going to use to store their information? And we're going to use the default, which is a SQLite database. Now this is not a database we'd want to use when we released our application live on the internet. SQLite can only really handle one request at a time. And usually when our website's live, it has multiple requests coming in. So we probably want to move to Postgres or something else. So let's create our first application. And it'll install all of the gems, and this could take a little while. Okay, so what that did is download all of our gems. And the gems are Rails or Ruby libraries that make up all the Rails framework. So it's importing a lot of different libraries. Sometimes it has to compile the libraries, so that could take some time. And then after the libraries are installed, one of the libraries happens to be called Webpacker, and that's to help us manage our JavaScript. And it allows us to take JavaScript plugins, which are lots of different little JavaScript libraries that we could add to our application. And it's an easy way to manage all of our JavaScript. So that Webpacker had to download and install some of the Rails JavaScript as well. So that took some time. Now that this command ran and it completed, we should be able to change directories into our app name. So I named my app to-do. So if you named your app something else, it would be that would be different. And then we could do an ls command, and we could see all of our files that were automatically created by the Rails command. We can run our Rails server now by doing bin/Rails. A lot of times you'll search on the web and it'll just say Rails. The bin/Rails is a local Rails command that makes sure that all of our libraries are linked together. And it also does something called Spring that helps our Rails application load faster. So we'll just run our server command here, and for short you could just type S. And hopefully the server will boot up. Now, since most of you will be working on Cloud 9, make sure you pay attention in class on how to start your server on Cloud 9 and how to view your application. If you're working on a local machine like I'm doing, you do localhost :3000, and here's the URL. And you can see, starting off, we have our landing page saying that everything has run successfully. So I'm going to open up a new tab and just leave our server running in this other terminal window tab. And now in this new tab, just to make sure you're aware of stuff, and hopefully you'll go to class and learn more about this, but there is one gem that we're using. It's called Bundler. And Bundler is a utility that will help manage all of our dependencies inside of Rails. So when we add libraries or other stuff that will do stuff for our application, Bundler will download those, install them into our application, and make sure that any dependencies that those use are also installed. And Yarn is another Bundler thing, but Yarn works for JavaScript. So, and also older versions of Rails made use of a rake command. So if you search online and you see something that says rake, a lot of times you can replace that with bin/Rails. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our first model. So a model is similar to a table inside of a database. Now the model will have a singular name and a plural name. The table will be pluralized. So the database table, if we were to go and look at it, it would be plural. The model name will be singular. So that represents one row in that database table. So make sure you pay really close attention to whether you're doing a singular version or a plural version. So we're going to use the scaffolding. So we're going to run the generate command right here. And of course you can shorten that to just G. And we're going to do the scaffolding. And now we can name our model. So I'm going to create tasks, and that's going to be task to do. So that's going to be my model. And inside of that model, I'm going to have fields, and I can add in fields later, but the generator, if I put them in here, it'll generate and add them all in. So I want a title, a due date, and a priority. Now, after the colon, that's going to be the database type. So the due date is going to be a date time, and the priority is going to be a number or an integer. And title, I left it off. You can put string there if you want, or by default it is a string. And that's usually going to use the varchar if you use the MySQL Postgres data type right there. So if we have multiple lines, like a paragraph of text, we would probably use the text. But I don't want a multiple lines in my title. I just want just a title. So the scaffolding generated a bunch of files for us, and you can see all of the different files that it created right here. You can go open up each one and look in there. Some of the files we won't use. Some of them are for testing, and some of them if we're going to do an API. Some of them are for CSS styling. But the main two files that were created was our model file right here, and also our controller. So if you notice, the controller manages multiple tasks. So the controller is plural, and the model has a singular name right there. So that just represents one task, and the controller is multiple tasks. And you can think of the model as a class that has the fields, the name, the due date, and the priority inside of that. And then it has other options that we can save that task to the database, or we can load tasks out of the database, which we'll see in a little bit. Now, if we were developing, we'd have to go to our database, and we'd have to create this table that had the name, due date, and priority inside of it. But Rails will help us with that, and it also created what's called a migration, and that's this first file right here. And that's just some code that will create the database table for us. So why is it doing this? Well, if I'm sharing this application with other developers and we're all working on it, if I make a change to the database that's running on my machine, and they're developing on their own machine on their own database, then they have to make that same change. So how would I communicate that to them? And the best way is to just create migration files. So whenever they get my code, they can run the migration files, and it will modify the database the same way I modified my database. The other thing is when we release this app and deploy it so that it's live on the internet, there's going to be a database there, and we need to create that as well. So we're going to need those, be able to manage the database and make sure they're the same on our development machine, on our other friends who are developing with us, and on our live database that's for application on the web. So that's what migrations are for. So whenever we create a new model, either through the scaffolding or another way, we need to create a migration file and then run the migration file. So we can do that, and that will run our migration file, and it'll automatically create that table in our database. Now that we have the migration file, we do need to be careful, because if we misspell the name, we can't just go and change the name in the database, because then our code won't get the update about the new name. Also, it won't be in the migration anymore, so now if our friends use our migration file, they're going to have that error in there too. So usually when you want to make a change to the database, fix something, a misspelling, or add a column, we can create a new migration that would modify the database. However, if we haven't submitted our code to Git yet, and if we want to make a change, this is how we would have to do it. First, we go to bin rels db rollback, and that would revert that last migration. So the very last migration will be undone. So we created a table here, and now we dropped it. Opening up our project directory in our code right here, we could go down into this DB folder where our database files live. And by the way, this is the database, the SQLite database, or the file on the disk that we're using. If we're using a database server like Postgres or MySQL, we wouldn't have this file in here. But in the migrate folder, we can find our migration, we can make changes, and going back to here, after we make the changes, we can rerun our db migrate command. Now, be really careful. If you change a migration that's already been submitted to GitHub, and then you submit that to, it's been submitted to GitHub, when your friends, they download the new migration, but they won't run it. They'll only run the new migrations. If they've already run the older migration that was in Git before, they won't get those changes. So this is only a fix if you haven't submitted your code to GitHub yet. If your code is already on GitHub, the only way to fix it is to create a new migration, and that'll modify your database, rename a column, or rename the table, or add fields to it, or delete fields you don't want. So before you submit it to GitHub, you can roll it back, edit the migration file, and run it again. So now that we have this, we can go to our folder, and we can just go to tasks right here, or go to the web, and we already have this web page. We can create a new task, maybe complete video, give it a priority, a due date, and we can create the task. We can see one task, we can edit it, we can edit it back. We can see all of our tasks, so we could create another task. And go back, and now we have those. We can delete a task if we want. And now we only have one task. We go view that task, edit it, and so on. So the scaffolding did all of that for us. So going back, when we create a new task, usually tasks have to have a title. But what happens if I try to create a task without a title? And the title's blank, and we go back, and it's a blank title. Now, maybe we can try to prevent that. If they don't fill in all the information they need, we'd like to make sure that it's correct. And with that, we're going to add validations. So going back to our app, right here we have our controllers. So that controller that was created, the task controllers right here. We also have our models, and here's our task model. You see, it's just a class, and it inherits a lot of functionality from this application record class. And in here, we can add what are called validations. So we're doing this in the model because the model's what's going to save the stuff in the database. And hopefully you've been in class and learned about the model view controller framework. To save this stuff into the database, in the model we can check to make sure that all of the fields are correct before the record gets saved and written into the database. So how we can do that is we can say validates, and we want to validate the title, and presence true. So this right here is a hash, so we can validate a whole bunch of stuff. We can make sure that it has at least 3 characters in it. We can make sure that it doesn't have any spaces if we don't want any spaces. We can validate the format, lots of different things. But the presence, just make sure there's at least something in the title right there. We can validate our other field to make sure there's a date time, make sure it's in the future, make sure our priority is positive and not negative. All of that can be done in our model class right here. Now, all of the other code that saves the things into the database and pulls them back out is inherited from this thing right here. So our model files are start off pretty small. But in here, following the model view controller framework, we'd want to put a lot of our business logic. So as we add unique functionality for tasks, we would put it in this task model right here. So saving that and going back to our website, we can view the video that doesn't have a title. It's already saved in the database that way, so we can't really do anything about it. But now when we try to edit it, and when we update, we automatically get this error that the title can't be blank, and it won't let us save it until we put a title here. And that also works on the new task. So if I try to create a task without a title, we automatically get that error that shows up. Now the last thing I want to show before closing this video is changing the look of our website. Now there's a lot that we can do here. I'm just going to do a little bit, but here we have a table of our tasks right here. And when we go to look at a task, we kind of have this right here. So first I'm going to show you where this code is that does this. And then I'm going to show you how you can modify the code to make it your own, change the look of it. Now, in the first thing I'll do is in the config folder, there's a routes file. You'll be learning about routes a lot more, but this basically maps a URL, or what you type in the browser, the path at the end of it, to a controller and an action to call. Now the root URL is not mapped to anything right now. That's our, if we go to our root web page, it's just say, yay, you're on Rails. So if we just map our root URL to the tasks controller and the index action. Now you'll learn a lot more about this in the next video, but making that change. Now, of course, the tasks still go here, but when we go to our root URL right here, without any slash at the end of it, we still see the task, the index action that shows all of our videos. So now I'm going to briefly review the entire process of when we make a request for a web page using Ruby on Rails, how we get the web page back. So for instance, right here, I go to localhost :3000 and I'm on this page, and if I were to refresh and remake the request, exactly what happens to return this page to us. So the very first thing is in our config folder, we have this routes file. So in the routes file, it noticed that we went to the root URL, the root path, and it sees that the root path is connected to the task controller and the index action. So going up into the app folder, we have our controllers. Here's the tasks controller and the index action, our method right here. So the index method gets called, and if we notice, this is a capital T with a task, so we're calling the task class and we're asking it to return all tasks that it finds in the database. So that's our model file right here. Here's the class, the task class, and hidden in this application record is a all method that generates a SQL statement, runs that, and it returns all of the tasks that are in the database, and it instantiates a task for each task or each row in the database. So in this case, we have 2 tasks. So we get 2 task objects. Going back to the controller, right here, those 2 task objects get assigned to this variable. Now this little @ sign in front of a variable and Ruby means that this variable is an instance variable of the task controller. That just means it's part of or a field in the object or the class. So objects are very dynamic in Ruby, meaning we can add new fields onto one object and it doesn't necessarily add it onto the other objects of the same type. Is dynamically we just add new fields. So really all this does is save it so that we can use it in the views. If we don't put the @ sign in front of there, we can't use this variable in our views. Okay, so it seems like, well, that's it. Well, where's their HTML? Well, our HTML is stored away in the views file. So by default, the method name is called index. So, and the controller is called tasks. So it looks in our views folder under the tasks folder right here because that's the name of the controller. And we go down here to the index file right here. Now, since it's an HTML file, we got the .html.erb. Now this index.json.jbuilder is if we're doing an API, which we can discuss later on. But we'll click on this index.html, and we could see that it creates a table right here. And inside the table, notice that here's that variable that we created in the controller. For each task in the text variable, do this loop, and it creates one row printing out the title, the due date, and the priority. And then it also prints out some links to see the task, to edit, to destroy, and so on. So if we look at this, though, our HTML, what happened to the beginning, the title tags, and the head section, the body, the closing HTML? Where's all of that? Well, in our layouts file, we have an application.html.erb layout file, and every page inside of our website or our Ruby controller by default will have all of this HTML. This saves us a lot of time. We can set up a navigation bar right in here, and then that navigation bar will be on all the pages on our website. We can put on a common header and a common footer, and this will modify all the pages. And this yield call right here is where the stuff generated in this file will be placed. So in the layout file, right here in the body tag, whatever is in the view that gets chosen, this thing gets placed right here. Then all of this is returned to the browser to make the web page that we see. So one more thing before we move on our template. If you're going to copy over, say, a Bootstrap template, you can't just select everything and delete it all out and put your Bootstrap thing in here, because then you'll delete your yield tag, and these tags as well are important. So you need to kind of merge this with your template, making sure that you keep these around. By the way, this is ERB, stands for Embedded Ruby, which means inside of here, the greater than, less than percent, and the percent greater than is where you can put Ruby code. And if you put an equal sign right here, that means you're going to print something out in the Ruby code. So if we were to leave off this equal sign, it would generate the stuff that goes here, but we actually wouldn't print it out. So it would have been all for nothing. So just to show you here, this loop right here, it prints stuff out inside of the loop, but this command doesn't print anything out, so that's why there's no equal sign right there. So let's go ahead and go to our show view right here, and this is the HTML that gets generated when we view just one task. And maybe we can modify this a little bit. I'll just add a div tag here, and I'll give it a class with task, and then inside of it, I'll just put all of this right here. So we didn't make a big change, but we did add a class and surrounded this by a div tag right here. So not a really big change, but now we changed this. So now let's go to our website. And when we view a task, so we'll show our page source right here. And now we could see here's that div tag with those 3 paragraph tags inside of it. So we could see that we actually made that change and the change showed up, and we can see that of course our layout files, all those different methods that we included in there actually did some stuff right here. So we can see that there's our HTML. So now the last thing I want to do is modify this so that these, kind of like a blog, look exactly, each row looks exactly like this. So what I can do is I can take this code right here and copy and paste it, replace the table with that code. And there's actually an easier way to reuse code, and that is to turn this into a partial. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file right here. I'm going to name it _task.html.erb. So the underscore is really important, and what that means is this file is a partial, meaning it just contains part of an HTML page or a section. So when we create that, I'm going to go to my show view. I'm going to take all of this out here and put it into my partial that I just created. Okay, make sure I save both files here. And once I do that, though, we don't want to access the task variable. It actually will still work in the show view, but we don't want to access the instance variable we set up in the controller. There'll be a local variable called task, so we can just replace that with replace those without the @ sign. So back in the show view, if I run this, then we won't see our task anymore. But we can add a render call, and we'll just pass in the task. Now here is a little bit of Rails magic. So Rails is the render function is going to get called, and then it's going to see that an object was passed to it, and it's going to ask that object, what type of object are you? And it's going to say, I am a task. So it's going to look in the task folder in our views, task, for a file that's underscore task, name that. And it's going to use that as the partial. When we do that, now let's just make sure we didn't break anything, and yep, it still works. Okay, so now let's use that same task partial to do our index page that has all of our tasks on it. And just so that we can see that there's a little bit different, I'm going to say this is task is complete video 1, and this one is complete video 2. Okay, so here's our index page, and now we, instead of seeing it as this table, I want it to look the same as the show page. So going to the index view now that has the list of all of our tasks, I'm going to get rid of the table. In fact, I'm going to delete all of this right here. I'm going to make sure I leave my new task link there. And instead, I'm going to render my tasks. Okay, so in the index action, it loads multiple tasks or all the tasks in the database. So the instance variable is named tasks, with plural with an S, versus the show that only grabs one task out. So that's just named task without an S right here. But now a little bit of Rails magic, even more so, is now the render call is going to see that an object or something was passed to it, and it's going to ask that thing, what type are you? And it's going to say, I am an array. And it's automatically going to loop through each element of the array, and then it's going to ask the first element, what type of object are you? It's going to say it's a task, and it's going to find the task partial in the task folder, look for a task partial, and use that task partial to display that. Now that local variable in the partial right here will be set to the task that is supposed to get displayed right there. And when we loop to the next task, this task local variable right here will then get changed to the second task, and then so on. If we had 3, 4, or 5, each time we draw this out, this task will be something different. So let's see what that looks like. And now we could see that we have all of those tasks here. We can even show our page source right here, and we can see that we have one div for the first task and another div for the second task. So it did exactly what we're supposed to do. But we still have a little problem here. Now that I've changed this, there's no way to see each individual task, no way to edit the task or delete the task. All of that stuff is gone, so we need to add that back in. So we have a link on our index page to create a new task. And in our show view, we have a way to edit a task, and we have a way to get back to all the tasks. So all we need on our index page, somehow we need a link to see that one task. So what I could do here is make this title right here is turn it into a link to see just this individual task. So pretty easy to do. We can use the link to method. It's a helper method that will create a link. The first parameter is the text that we want to show up on our web page, and the second parameter is the URL. Now here is some more Rails magic here. Link to will ask the second parameter, what kind of object are you? It's going to say I'm a task, and knowing the routes and everything like that, it'll automatically generate a link that links to this task right here. So let's try it out. Okay, and now we have the two links. So now we can see the one video. We can go back and see the second video task right there. So those links are working. Now optionally, if we don't want the link here on the show page, because it just goes to itself, why have that be a link? But we do still want the link on the title page. There's one more thing we can do, is use the method link to unless current. So this is a method, it probably uses the link to method, but it checks the path. And if that's the path we're already on, it won't make it a link. Instead, it will just display the text. So back on the index page, we still have the links, but when we click on it on the show view, we don't have the links. So, and from here, we can edit it. So we don't have to add an edit link here. We could if we want to, and then make it nice. We can still create a new task. The only thing that's missing is a delete link. So let's add in the delete link. So again, this is the partial, so stuff that I add in here, we'll add it both on the show page and the index page. If we just want the link to show up on the show page, we put it outside of the partial. That's why the edit only shows up on the show page and not the index page. So we'll just need to add a delete link right here. So we'll do link to, and we want to delete right here. And we can do task path. Now you might wonder how I know how to do the task path and stuff, and here's where you want to pay attention either in class or go to the Rails routing guide that shows you what methods you have that can link to certain spots. And the only thing is we need this, according to the RESTful routing, we need this to be a delete in order to route to the destroy path that's going to delete the object. We can also add a data right here that will And then we'll do confirm. And now this will just pop a little warning. Are you sure you want to delete this? Give the user a chance to cancel out if you really didn't want to delete this. And so let's see what that link looks like. And we'll refresh on our show page, and now we have the delete link. When we click on it, it says, are you sure? If you click cancel, it won't delete it. And if you click OK, then the task is gone. And now we're on the all task page, and we can recreate it. Only thing is we've got the little bar to separate the links, so we can add that in pretty quick. Just add that little bar there. Okay, the last thing I'll do really quick is just add some style to that. So what if I want to add some CSS here? Where do I put my CSS? So that's going to be in our assets folder. So we've got our our root project and the assets, and there's a style sheets folder right here. We have our application, our scaffolding. This is the style that's kind of was created when we did our scaffolding. And then in our tasks right here, we can just use that class that I added, the task class, and I'm just going to add a border, then solid, and we'll make it black. Okay, so we need to also put a period in front of our selector here, and let's see if that border shows up. So we should refresh, and it didn't show up. So just wanted to show you a quick way to debug this. We can inspect here, and we can make sure we click on that, and if we notice it's not showing up, but I'm looking at the class name and it's plural. And let's look at what we did in our style sheet, and we have a singular name, so we should probably make sure that those match up. So I'm actually going to change in my partial, I'm going to change that to a singular name because it's just one task, so that makes more sense to call it a task instead of tasks. And now let's see if it shows up. And we'll refresh, and now we have a black border, and we can see all of our videos with a black border. There's more we can do here to make it look nicer, which you will have to do in your assignment. Now the last thing that we need to do is we need to push our code up to GitHub. In fact, I probably should have been doing that all along the way after I ran the scaffold command, push our code up. After I changed a little bit, commit and re-push up the code. So let's do that real quick. Now, if you're running on Cloud 9 like we're doing in our class, be really careful because there is a Git repository automatically created in your environment folder, I think is what it's called. Then this is a different Git repository. So you want to make sure you're running your commands from the root of your application. So you should see your application name right there. In there, if you have a different command prompt, you could do pwd, and you should see that you are in your root folder. So here's where we would run our git commands. So we can see all the files that we've added or changed, but we can add everything. So git add -A for add all changed and new files. And then we can commit with a message, add task to our task model to application. Okay. And after we commit, we would push our code up to GitHub. And working on Cloud 9, if anything goes wrong with the instance, you'll lose all of your work. So you want to commit a lot to just so that you have a good backup if your instance of Cloud 9 breaks, and then you can always just set up a new instance and pull down your code and be up and running instead of having to redo all of your code. So thanks for watching, and good luck on your project.